Welcome one, welcome all to episode 10 of the Matty B Show. Today we look at the 2020 Super Bowl, the big blockbuster trade that the Hawks made for Clint Capela. We have a look back at the first 10 episodes of the Matty B Show, and of course our Q&A segment, What Matters. So, let's get into it. Alrighty, welcome back to the podcast, everyone. And I'm glad to say that after 3 or 4 weeks of, let's say, irregular episodes, we have a regularly scheduled one. I know, who would have thought that having a consistent upload schedule would have been a great thing for a podcast? So now, we haven't had anything too big in terms of news happen this week that would throw a spanner in the works for the podcast. So today, I'm glad to say, we're back in business. We're back on track with our regular episodes. And we got a good one. And this is a sort of format that I'm, willing to trial. But it's definitely something I want to look into, perhaps being the permanent structure of our solo episodes, so the ones with just you and me. And that is having different segments about different things that have happened in the world, as opposed to having, let's say, one whole podcast about one whole topic. I definitely want to do those episodes still, but I think those things are probably best suited towards a group episode or a guest episode of the podcast, because people can weigh in with their specific perspectives and ideas on a singular issue, whereas I feel like, as a solo thing, listening to one person talk about the same thing over and over again can get a little bit boring and perhaps a little bit repetitive. So we're trying to avoid that with this new sort of exciting format, I hope, where we cover lots of different topics within the episode. So let's not delay anymore and jump into our first topic, and that is Super Bowl 54. And now that happened earlier this week, happened on Monday the 3rd of February for those living in Australia, and that would have happened on what would it have been? It would have been February the 2nd, which was a Sunday, if it was to be happening in America, which it did, but it depends on where you watched it, I guess. And all I want to say is that my initial thoughts with this game were that it was sick. It was a big upgrade over last year's, let's say, low scoring encounter. And I'm sad to say that as a Rams fan. And, the Rams were in the Super Bowl last year and lost 13-3 without scoring a touchdown. But I'm glad to say that didn't happen this year. So, with that being said, congratulations to the Kansas City Chiefs for winning the Super Bowl. It was a little bit like the Cleveland Cavaliers winning in 2016 in the sense that this was the first time that the Kansas City Chiefs have won in 50 years. That's a long time between drinks for a team, and I guess congrats to them for finally breaking that drought. It's a big achievement, and hopefully for them at least, they get to see quite a bit more Super Bowl success. One thing I want to say is this is a shout out to Mr. Donald Trump, who obviously isn't listening to this podcast, but I want you to know that, sir, Kansas City is in Missouri. You would have seen, guys, he tweeted, "Congratulations to the great state of Kansas," when in fact the Kansas City Chiefs are not from Kansas. I know, simple mistake to make, but not one that you should be making when you are the president of the United States. But that's just one of the many mistakes that he's made on Twitter the past couple of years. But I'd say probably one of the more acceptable ones, which is weird to say, and probably something you shouldn't be talking about with a president, but that's okay. We're not going to delve into politics and, the farce that has been the Trump administration, that is an episode I'd say is for another time, where we're focusing on some different topics today. So coming into the Super Bowl, I unfortunately or fortunately, depending on who you follow, picked the 49ers to win. I thought that defensively they were much, much better than the Chiefs, and that they had a few more experienced players who had been playing in big games. I mean, people like Richard Sherman, even Jimmy Garoppolo was an experienced player in one sense. He didn't get a great deal of playing time under Bill Belichick and under Tom Brady in that Pat system, but nonetheless, he was still on those teams and still probably gained, I'd say, a lot of valuable experience that he could have applied to his own playoff run here. And, that got him so far. They got all the way to the Super Bowl and were leading for a good portion of this game. But at the end of the day, they unfortunately didn't win. And I think it's no surprise, or looking back at the game, you could easily see that the Niners were on top for all those first three quarters. They were passing, running, defending at will. Kansas City, this explosive offense that they had, looked lost. They didn't really know what to do, and everybody on that 49ers defense was playing great, except for Richard Sherman, who had a pretty bad game and got cooked by Tyreek Hill at one point there, but, he's the best corner in the game, according to himself, so that is probably not what he wanted. But outside of him, that 49ers defense was firing, and it was really impressive to see them shut down Patrick Mahomes, the reigning league MVP up until the night before, and it was very impressive, because we all knew that the Niners were good, but we weren't expecting that sort of lockout, only being able to score one touchdown, and that touchdown being a rushing touchdown from Patrick Mahomes after he had a little bit of a scramble there. So that's very impressive on the Niners' part, but it all came crumbling down in the fourth quarter. I'm not really sure what happened, really. I think Patrick Mahomes kind of just said, screw it, I'm going for gold, and he just started playing like the absolute MVP he is, and he was passing over everyone. His receivers were making good catches, and that looked like they finally understood what to do when coming up against this 49ers defense. And an interesting stat to look at with this game is that, on average, the 49ers rushed significantly more than they passed during the regular season. And then during this game, the 49ers only rushed 22 times, which I know sounds like a lot, but they passed 31 times, so 10 times more than they rushed, which is such a weird thing. I don't know if Kyle Shanahan, the 49ers coach, thought that maybe the Chiefs had prepared for a run-heavy offense, but it really just didn't work, and it was quite surprising to see that they didn't really play to their strengths. I think Jimmy Garoppolo is a great quarterback, but I don't think he should be passing 35 times in a Super Bowl, which it was quite an odd anomaly in their season, really. Like, if you lined up all their games for the entire season and said, all right, which one or which game plan do you think they would have gone with in the Super Bowl, there's no way you would have picked that one, because that wasn't really their strength. I think it was quite a disappointing show from them, and I think Kyle Shanahan should take a little bit of the blame there for the play calling. But it is what it is. The 49ers lost, which is a shame, but the good thing about them is that they have a fairly young team. Just last year they missed the playoffs and were atrocious. So seeing them come back and bounce back is a a sign or a testament of things that are likely to come. So I predict that they have another strong year next year. I pray that they don't have a year as good as the Rams. But I think as a Rams fan, I think we might be stuck in purgatory for a little bit because of the salary cap situation that we are in and all of the player dilemmas that we are having at the moment. Now, Patrick Mahomes won Super Bowl MVP, and I think that was the wrong call. And I've seen many other people say that it was the wrong call as well. And I think that's fair because they gave it to him just because he was the quarterback and just because they had a comeback. Those first 3 quarters, Patrick Mahomes was not playing well at all. He had an interception. He had quite an average or bad to most people's accounts completion rate, and they hadn't scored a passing touchdown. And that all, of course, turned around in the fourth, where they put on 21 unanswered points. But at the same time, you should take into account the entire game and not just the 15 or so minutes that Patrick Mahomes played well. And I think Damian Williams should have won the Super Bowl MVP. He consistently, throughout this game, turned plays that looked like they were going to break down into 5-yard carries, into first downs. He took the ball and created something out of nothing. And that was something that really got the Chiefs out of trouble at times there when the 49ers looked like they might be coming for the threat, going for the jugular. Williams really, put the team on his back and said, all right, Patty Mahomes isn't doing great. He hasn't contributed as much as he usually does. So it is my job to go out there and get this dub for the team. He rushed for 100 yards and he had 2 touchdowns. And I'm just really disappointed that the NFL decided to give the MVP to Mahomes just because his name was Patrick Mahomes. It's I think it's a problem that is rife throughout the recent history of the Super Bowl and even the regular season MVPs as well. I think 10 out of the past 13, the stat was, I'm pretty sure, Super Bowl MVPs were quarterbacks. And I mean, I'm all well and good and happy for you to give the Super Bowl MVP to a quarterback if they deserve it. And I'm sure many of the players that have won Super Bowl MVP as a quarterback do deserve it. But I think, especially in an era in the NFL where offenses are so high-powered, where 30 points a game is just kind of the norm now, I don't think looking at their stats and saying, oh, wow, that was impressive. He had 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. Well, that's a regular, normal game. I don't think they should be winning MVP for that. So I think that's probably a problem that the NFL will have to address at some point, because I think that it's unfair to anybody else. It doesn't matter what position you play. If you aren't a quarterback, it seems as though your chances of winning any awards, whether that be MVP or Super Bowl MVP, are completely slashed, and that's a real shame to see. But on the whole, awesome Super Bowl. I really enjoyed it. I think that, of course, in comparison to last year, millions and millions of times better. I think the fact that it was a nail biter, that the Chiefs had that fourth quarter comeback was really beneficial in healing some of the wounds that last year's Super Bowl recorded or inflicted. So with that being said, I hope that next year we get a game that is very similar to this. I predicted that the Saints and the Ravens would be in the Super Bowl. If you guys saw the episode I did with Dylan, NFL playoff predictions, you can go listen to that now. Have a listen back and see what we predicted right, what we predicted wrong. And newsflash, spoiler alert, we predicted quite a few things wrong. but that is okay. And I'm hoping next year we get, maybe a Seahawks or a Rams versus another high-powered offense like the Chiefs or the Ravens. I think that'd be super cool to have teams just throw 50 on one another. If you guys remember last season, so not the season that just finished, but the one before that, there was that Chiefs-Rams game where each team scored 50 points and the Rams won it on the buzzer. I think a game like that would be awesome for the Super Bowl, if only for the spectacle of it all. Just the sheer insanity that would ensue after having a game where the scoring was that high would be very impressive, I think. Another thing that I want to have a little bit of a chat about is the halftime show. Oh boy, that was a spicy one, wasn't it? So you had J-Lo and you had Shakira on stage doing their little duet thing, or their little shows, and it was quite a raunchy and steamy show. These two women were scantily dressed, shaking their booties, as one would call it, and I think that it was a great spectacle. It was very enjoyable to watch because it was just so crazy, so wild, and so entertaining to see something so brave yet so daring. I think the energy that was brought to the show more than anything was the draw factor, not the fact that these two beautiful women were not wearing much, or perhaps being a little bit promiscuous. The fact that just they were loving life, they were so full of energy and so full of passion for what they were doing was great to see. And you see the Facebook keyboard warriors online saying, oh, women shouldn't dress like that. It's degrading. It's disgusting. And it's usually 50-year-old women or with bowl cuts being bitter for the sake of being bitter. But the one thing I want to say to them is, you guys weren't complaining last year when Adam Levine from Maroon 5 was performing without his shirt. So it's a little bit hypocritical that you would pick on these women just because they are women. And, I think they should be allowed to do whatever they want to do in their Super Bowl halftime show. I mean, look, Karen, have you had the privilege of performing at the halftime of the Super Bowl? No, I don't think so. So pipe down. But, I think there's a lot of hate out for this year's halftime show, and I think it is all undeserving. I think it was a great show, great spectacle. And the Super Bowl as a whole was an awesome game. Super enjoyable to watch. I can't wait for the NFL season to start up at the end of the year, and I'm keen for another great year. Now, in NBA news, just yesterday, the day before I recorded this podcast, there was a big trade that went down. Clint Capela is off to the Atlanta Hawks, and I saw Clint Capela come up in quite a few trade rumors, throughout the season, and particularly towards the trade deadline, which is coming up within the next week or two. So I'm not completely surprised to see that he was dealt, but I am surprised to see the way that he was and what the Rockets got back for him. And I want to take a little bit of a deep dive into this trade, because I think it has some quite large ramifications, particularly for the current situation in the Western Conference and the future of the Eastern Conference. So this is a very complicated trade, so I'm going to try and go through this and explain it as clearly as possible. I will explain what each team got in and what each team gave out, and at the end I'll give a little bit of a summary. So the Atlanta Hawks received Clint Capela, and they traded away Evan Turner, Brooklyn's 2020 first round pick, and Golden State's 2024 second round pick. The Houston Rockets received Robert Covington, Jordan Bell, the Golden State Warriors 2024 second round pick, and they traded away Clint Capela, Nene, Gerald Green, and their own 2020 first round pick. But this was a 4-team trade after all, and the third team involved was the Minnesota Timberwolves, and they received Malik Beasley, Juan Hernan-Gomez, Evan Turner, Jarrett Vanderbilt, and Brooklyn's 2020 first rounder. They traded away Robert Covington, Jordan Bell, Noah Vonleh, Keita Bates-Diop, Shabazz Napier. All right. And the Denver Nuggets were the fourth team involved in this trade. They received Gerald Green, Keita Bates-Diop, and Shabazz Napier, Noah Vonleh, and finally Houston's 2020 first. And they traded away Malik Beasley, Juan Hernan-Gomez, and Jared Vanderbilt. Whew. All right. That was a lot. That was a lot to take in. We're going to break it down team by team to see what the situation is for them, because that was a complicated one to say the least. That's 12 players and 3 picks. So it's a massive trade in terms of content and also in terms of, scale. But there is a lot of moving pieces to this trade. Lots of little cogs. Some bigger than others, of course, but it is a very complicated one to analyze. So let's start off by looking at Atlanta. So Atlanta received Clint Capela, and I think Clint Capela is definitely a top 10 center in this league. Great, prolific rebounder, awesome rim defender. Scoring's not quite there, but he still has those putbacks, those DeAndre Jordan-esque post moves. And I think, without a doubt, one of the better centers in the league. And I think that Atlanta, by and large, got him for chump change. They lost Evan Turner, who was way, way overpaid. He got his massive extension way back in that 2016 season when the NBA salary cap spiked with the new TV deal. So that was the year that many players got contracts that were just way too large. That was also the year that made Golden State signing Kevin Durant possible, just for a little bit of context. But the good thing about that Evan Turner contract is that it is expiring at the end of this year, and he will be a free agent, which means that the Hawks clear up a bit of, they don't really clear up cap space, they kind of just stay equal in that sense, but the Rockets, they clear up some cap space, and, they have some salary cap issues, which we'll dive into a little bit more. They also traded away Brooklyn's 2020 first round pick, which is projected 16th overall in the 2020 draft at the moment. But with Kyrie Irving coming back and some of those role players having that weight taken off of their shoulders, like Spencer Dinwiddie, I think that Brooklyn's record is set to improve, and that will probably become a lower pick in the near future, around the 21, 22 range, maybe, depending on how other teams in that mid-Eastern Conference and Midwestern Conference perform, like the Thunder. But at the moment, a 16th overall pick, which is, mid-first round. And the last thing that they got was the Golden State Warriors second rounder. And the chance of a second round pick eventuating into a serviceable player in the NBA is quite low. So as it stands, I think that Brooklyn pick is the thing that is worth the most in the deal. So with that being said, that means Atlanta traded away bugger all. I think, of course, there's room for that Brooklyn pick to backfire. Maybe the Nets get worse, and that pick somehow, by miracle, becomes a lottery pick, or maybe even a top 10 pick, depending on if they completely capitulate. But I doubt that they do, seeing as though they have so many good, solid players that'll keep them in the playoff hunt. So I think for what they gave away and what they received, great trade for the Atlanta Hawks. I think this core of Trae Young, John Collins, DeAndre Hunter, and now Clint Capela is a very strong one that into the future could do some damage, especially as those two younger guys, Trae Young and DeAndre Hunter, start to develop even more from the point that they are already, which is very, very impressive. So now on to Houston, the second team in this deal. And I'm a little bit confused with this one. Now, of course, this does relieve a part of the salary cap pressure that they have. They have James Harden and Russell Westbrook both earning around $40 million a year. So that takes up a significant part of their salary cap. And Clint Capela was their next highest paid player. I think he was earning around 18 a season, 20, something like that. So getting rid of him and taking in Evan Turner's expiring, relieves a little bit of cap space, but I don't think getting Robert Covington and Jordan Bell back in that deal was enough for what they gave away. I think there was probably a better trade out there somewhere. I like Robert Covington. I think he's a great 3-and-D perimeter player, perimeter shooter, but I just don't think that will meld well. It won't come together as a cohesive team because 6'5" PJ Tucker is now their starting center. And you can't tell me that Jordan Bell is a starting caliber center on a playoff team. I know he played some games for Golden State, but when your team is that lopsided, you don't really need to worry about that too much. So with that, I think if they didn't give away Capela and were somehow able to get Covington, awesome deal. Would have done them a world of good. But the fact that they had to give him away for it, not quite sure. And of course, Houston is known for being innovative in the game. They were one of the first teams to completely say screw it and go straight in and dive into that 3-point revolution that we had at the end of the decade. But I don't think this super duper undersized lineup with an average height of around 6'4" is going to be any good against anybody that has a big, strong starting center. So think Denver, think Philadelphia, think even someone like Detroit with Andre Drummond. I don't think they'll be able to deal with that sort of muscle down low because, well, they're just small, no muscle. I don't know what they're going to do. The third team to get involved in this trade was, of course, the Minnesota Timberwolves, which is probably a bit weird, seeing as though they've lost 16 straight. And I don't know if Malik Beasley, Juan Hernan Gomez, Jared Vanderbilt can make them that much better, to be completely honest. I think that giving up Covington was probably a call that was going to happen eventually. I think a contending team, whether that be someone like the Clippers or the Lakers or even one of the lower tier teams in the West, were going to come calling and say, hey, we want him. What will it take? So I think it wasn't a matter of who, it was a matter of if, it was a matter of when. And obviously they've pulled the trigger on this trade. But I don't see this as a long-term solution to the terrible basketball that they've been playing recently. I think maybe they're trying to gather some trade pieces up so that they can make an all-in dash for D'Lo. But, it's Minnesota are just bad, and they will be bad for the foreseeable future if they do not put any good pieces around Karl Anthony Towns. Andrew Wiggins had a good start to the season, but he's really cooled off. Back to last year Wiggins, where he's shooting terribly, looks a bit tentative, not really going out there with the intent that he had at the beginning of the year. So this season is definitely a write-off for them, and that's unfortunate to see. And the fourth team to get involved in this trade were the Denver Nuggets. Denver, they got some nice bench players out of this trade. Nothing that's going to push them over the top, seeing as though they already have such a good, solid bench. They got a late first rounder, and that is going to help them in the future. Even if it's a little bit of a trade piece, trade incentive, maybe to be something that pushes a trade over the top, or could select somebody, who knows, might strike gold and get a great player in the first round. But currently there's the second best team record-wise in the West, and I don't think this trade really mattered to them. I think they just did it for the sake of setting themselves up a little bit better in the future and relieving a little bit of cap space. Malik Beasley, Juan Hernan Gomez, not exactly standout players, so I think it was more so a way of consolidating the situation that they are currently in. And they've strengthened an already strong second unit, but I think they probably come out as neutral until the foreseeable future. But, good on them for being active and getting out there towards the trading deadline. So my final thoughts on this trade: the winner, Atlanta; the loser is Houston, but we will see. Who knows? Might all backfire, might all fall in place for Houston. We'll never know until we get there. We won't know until we cross that bridge. What we're going to do now is have a little bit of a mid-podcast intermission. It'll be the first time you guys would have heard one of these, but I think that it is probably good, just to break up the podcast a little bit more. Clear your minds, get ready for another piece or another bit of great content from the Matty B Show. I hope you guys are enjoying the Matty B Show so far. This is episode 10 that you were listening to. Before we jump back in to the rest of the podcast, I encourage you guys to go have a like of the Facebook page. That's the Matty B Show on Facebook. Go have a like of the Instagram page. That is the Matty B Show on Instagram. Also, make sure that you are sending in your emails to themattyBshow@gmail.com. Ask me some questions. Give me some feedback. We'll see. We've got our Q&A segment, What Matters, coming up next. And I can't wait to hear some of the great questions that you guys have sent in to the podcast. So, this is the Matty B Show, coming from Spotify, Apple, and Whooshka. Now, with that being said, let's jump in to the rest of episode 10. Welcome back after our first intermission, everybody. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to my silky, smooth voice. But let's head back into the rest of our topics today. And our next topic is going to be a quick one, but we're going to be looking back at our first 10 episodes of the Matty B Show. Can't believe that we are already at episode 10. I thought it was only a few weeks ago, it feels like, that I finally decided to start the podcast back up again and get it going officially, get it going out there in the public and not hiding it away, hoping that nobody would ever find it. So, what I want to think about is, my favorite parts of what we've done so far, the things that have been good, the things that have been bad, and perhaps some of the things that we can improve on in the coming episodes. So, we've slowly begun to grow as a podcast, and I think this has just been through the word of mouth currently, the word of mouth of my friends and my family, and I'm excited in the future to grow at a higher rate because we've got some good guests coming on in the coming weeks, and we've got to hopefully get some deliberate advertising out there, try grow the Matty B Show. But it's been really promising to see that week after week we're getting more and more listens. And I know so many people who have created podcasts and YouTube channels and things of that sort who have spiked right at the beginning and felt super positive about where they're going to go and what the future holds, but then they get a bit disappointed when those views start to drop back down and start to normalize. And that's of course happened to us, but I think we are past that initial drop down now, and we're slowly starting to grow back up. And I'm really happy about that, and I'm really excited to start growing the podcast at a faster rate, because I want to get as many listeners to the show as possible. You know, we want a good foundation and a good, solid listenership for this little show of ours. So, for someone who is an aspiring sports journo, or a journo and a sports journo in particular, I think we've done pretty well in averaging out what sort of episodes we have. So we have 4 non-sports episodes and we have 6 sport episodes, including this one. So I think that's a good mix. I think people can get tied down to one particular category and, you know, really stagnate there. And I'm happy that we have a good solid base in sport, and I really love sport, and it's definitely something I'm going to continue talking about, and there's nothing that you guys can do to stop me. But it's also great to have that that other mix of stuff that I know you guys really, really enjoy as well. And trust me, don't worry, it will start to broaden out even more. We're going to talk to more people, we're going to interview more people, and hopefully we will have a great mix and a great range of podcasts come the end of the year. A personal favorite for mine was probably the New Year, New Me episode, and that was episode 5. So at the beginning, it was a little bit of a comedic piss take on New Year's resolutions, but then we delved deeper and we looked at why people set goals, and then I think the most beneficial part of that was the fact that I was able to have some good self-reflection, and that I could now see, you know, certain things I hadn't seen before, and I got to express myself, and I really enjoyed putting my goals out there, and I really enjoyed hearing from some of you about how the goals were great and how you can't wait to see some of the things that I spoke about come to fruition. And I can't wait to start pumping out some brand new episodes for you guys. It's really exciting to see week after week a new episode pop up every time, and I can't wait for 10 more, for 20 more, for 30 more, for however many more. We're going to keep going, and I'm really, really excited for it. Now we have our Q&A segment, What Matters? And just like the intermission, which is a brand new thing in this episode, we've also got another brand new thing relating to what matters today, and that is we've got a little bit of an intro song. So I'm not going to intro it like this every week, but this is what you guys are going to be hearing every time before we jump in to what matters. Welcome to What Matters, the segment where I, Matty B, am grossly unqualified to answer the important questions that you ask me. But still, I'll do it. All right, that was a pretty sick intro song, if I do say so myself, and I know, can't wait to hear it again next week, and the week after that, and the week after that. Get excited for it. So our question today comes in from Mike, and he has a question about our Kobe episode, and that was a bit more of a somber one, but I'm glad that we still got a little bit of engagement out of that one, and we've actually got a really interesting question about, you know, what my mindset was when recording that episode. So the question here is, was skirting by a well-documented sexual assault drama in Kobe's life the right call? Does not a full reckoning of an individual's life and legacy need to be accounted for? Or in death, is sanctification and iconic legend status left to be untainted? Should eulogies be selective or confined exclusively to the positive? Or is it all about timing? So that is a pretty big question. A very heavy question, considering it is about, one, a very heavy topic in the form of sexual assault, and two, it's coming less than a week after a man's death. But I want to take you through my mindset and answer that question to the best of my abilities. So we'll go from there. And I think bringing up the bad things that a person has done completely depends on who they are. Serial murderer? Sure, let's bring it up. That's obviously something that makes up a gigantic and irreversible portion of this person's life and legacy. But bringing it up for a generational basketball talent who inspired millions, I think that it is without a doubt not the thing that you first think of when you hear the name Kobe Bryant. So I think that is really important. I think legally as well, he was never actually convicted, so it's not only unfair but also defamatory to if I were to call him a rapist or a convicted sexual assaulter, because simply according to the law, that isn't true. And I guess the fact that there was a settlement out of court, a little bit worrying. It is possible that proves guilt, or maybe it's possible that he just wanted to get the case over and done with, as is the case with many high-profile celebrity disputes. But I've got a quote here from Kobe regarding this whole issue. And I think it's telling about his mindset, and I think it's telling about the situation as a whole. So let me quote this. He said this in 2004, a year into the legal proceedings and all that. So that's the context you need. And the quote is, "Although I truly believe this encounter between us was consensual, I recognize now that she did not and does not view this incident the same way I did. After months of reviewing discovery, listening to her attorney, and even her testimony in person, I now understand how she feels that she did not consent to this encounter." Now, I'm not here to speculate whether Kobe is a rapist or a sexual assaulter, nor will I get into any future debates about that. But what this shows is at least some form of remorse and empathy to the situation that the young lady was in. And of course, if Kobe did do these things that he was alleged of, that's a terrible, terrible thing to do. And I think that should be factored into his public legacy. But if he didn't do it, then I think any criticism that comes against him for this is completely unfair. And the fact that I'm talking about it now would be completely unfair if it turns out this was untrue. But as you know, we just don't understand or don't know what the situation is, especially because he has passed away. Now, there's evidence saying that he did do it. There's evidence saying he didn't do it. And the case was dropped. So you just can't legally make an argument for the fact that he did. So as it stands, I think you factor it into his legacy, but it's not the key point you take away from that. And besides, I think Kobe Bryant was undoubtedly a net positive for society and positively impacted more lives than he did the opposite. And I think what this whole situation is indicative of, though, is the negative nature of the media in our society. When a man has lost his life, when a wife and a family has lost a husband and a daughter, when an entire league has lost their mentor, when an entire generation has lost their hero, what does mainstream media jump on straight away? The negativity of what is a high-profile, dismissed legal case, especially when it's something that can be defamatory of his character very quickly. And I think it's pretty sick to see that happen in the media. They prey on the negativity. They try to get angry, visceral responses to this situation, and because that's what makes them money, and that's what gets them more clicks. That's just the nature of the business, and it's disappointing. And it's a part of the reason why people are starting to flow away from the mainstream media, because people are just sick of the rot. I definitely want to do an episode, about this topic and delve into it deeper, because I think the Kobe situation is emblematic of some of the issues that we have in the media at the moment. But to answer your questions specifically, did I avoid it? Did I avoid the question, or did I avoid the situation of his, alleged sexual assaults? No, I don't think so. I think I clearly outlined that the episode was a celebration or a memorial of his life and his legacy. And more importantly, I think I outlined pretty clearly that it was my thoughts on the topic. And that meant focusing on the positives of a man and my fond memories of who he was. And especially because I was 2 years old when these alleged sexual assaults happened. So I have no memory, I have no experience with these things. So I only felt comfortable and felt right talking about the personal experiences that I had with Kobe Bryant and his legacy. Should this be taken into account for his life? Absolutely. I think if you were to make a feature-length documentary film about Kobe Bryant, it would be just dumb to skip this part. But I think in the context of my podcast, it was unneeded. And your other question was, in death, is sanctification and iconic legend status to be left unattained? Well, he is an iconic basketball legend first and foremost. And something that has happened off the court cannot taint that legacy, as it does not affect the context of if he was a good basketball player or not. So I don't think it should affect that legacy. Can it affect the way that society viewed him as a person? Sure. If you're that way inclined and you believe that he truly did do those things, absolutely. You can skew your view or perception of the man in any way that you seem fitting. But you cannot take away how good he was at basketball. There have been many sports stars, basketball players included, that have had public scandals before. I mean, Michael Jordan, for many, the greatest basketball player in the history of the world, was an atrocious gambler, like dangerously bad gambler. And that's something that people take into account when viewing him as a person, but it isn't something that people take into account when looking at how good he was at basketball. I think for the Australians listening, I think a topic or a person that's a bit more relatable in that sense is Donald Bradman. Now, Donald Bradman is undoubtedly the greatest cricketer of all time. Average of 99.94 in Test cricket. One of the most skilled players to ever hold a cricket bat. But by all accounts, he was a terrible bloke. He just didn't care about his teammates. He was rude. He just didn't care, and he was just a bit of a, excuse my language, a shit bloke. And I think that is absolutely something that you can take into account when thinking of him as a person. You say, all right, Don Bradman, I don't think he was a nice guy, but you cannot doubt the basketball legacy that, the cricketing legacy and icon status that he has. So I think you can absolutely take it into account, but you can't take away their iconic legend status simply because it doesn't really have anything to do with that, if that makes sense. Hope that makes sense to you. And the other and last question was, should eulogies be selective or confined exclusively to the positive, or is it all about timing? Well, I think a eulogy would probably be solely positive. And that is probably, I wouldn't say probably, because definitely you're really only getting a eulogy from places of love and support. You're getting a eulogy at your funeral, you're getting a eulogy at a public memorial or something like that. So you aren't going to have a sad, somber ceremony where they're mourning your death and they're going to just bring up the fact that you've had some issues in your life. That just doesn't make complete sense. You're not going to be like, all right, Kobe Bryant, he was a loving father. He was a great basketball player, and he was also an alleged sexual assaulter who had a dismissed case in the early 2000s. You're not going to say that. A eulogy is, in and of itself, supposed to be a positive overall thing. So I don't think that they have to necessarily be confined to being positive, but I think 99.9% of the time they are positive, because that's just the nature of the way that we view them. So, Mike, thank you for that question. It was a complicated and I don't want to say confronting, but it was a good pushback to something that you saw was important in my episode, and I appreciate the question. But with that being said, everyone, that has been episode 10 of the Matty B Show. It's been a great one. I think we've introduced a few little things that we haven't seen in the podcast before, which is great. We've got our new little intermission piece, and we've got our new intro segment music thing for the Q&A segment. And I can't wait to create a new podcast for you all next week. But before we go, make sure you are sending in your emails to mattybpodcast@gmail.com. I'll repeat it again, mattybpodcast@gmail.com. Make sure you like me on Facebook and Instagram, the Matty B Show there as well. And please, if you can, leave some positive reviews on Apple Podcasts so that we can get some new members into this Matty B Show family. So with that being said, I hope you will have a great week, and I'll hear and see you all again next Friday. And that has been that.